Welcome to Customs and Courtesies. I'm your host, Wellington, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about misinformation versus disinformation. Now, a couple of notes. We're going to go for a rebrand. So I've been kind of taking a couple breaks here and there in recording, and I've decided that I'm going to go for a rebrand. A couple of my friends have pointed out, what is it that you're going to talk about on your episodes? Where are you going with certain things? And, I've thought about it long and hard, and I'm going to combine what I'm good at, history and intel. So, you'll be noticing a couple of series coming out soon, specifically focusing on intelligence and the history of it and so on. That's kind of what I've been doing. It's kind of what I'm good at. So, one thing that I spent a lot of my master's program discussing, writing, talking about is misinformation. So, I'm going to do a couple part series about misinformation. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So, for this week's episode, Unraveling Truth. This is going to be a podcast where we dig deep into the world of facts, falsehoods, and everything in between. I am your host, and in today's episode is all about understanding the critical difference between disinformation and misinformation. In today's world of information overload, the lines between fact and fiction can get blurry, but it is important to know that not all incorrect information is created equal. Disinformation and misinformation might sound similar, but their impacts and the motivations behind them are quite different. So, for the next 20 minutes, we'll dive into what makes these two concepts unique, why they matter, and how they affect our daily lives. Let's start by defining our key terms: misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is simply false information that is shared without harmful intent. It's when someone spreads something inaccurate, but they believe it to be true. Think of well-meaning family member who shares a Facebook post about a miracle cure for the common cold. They're not trying to deceive you. They just don't know that the information is wrong. On the other hand, disinformation is deliberately false information spread with the intention of deceiving. The goal of disinformation is often more nefarious, whether it's to manipulate public opinion, influence elections, or sow chaos. Disinformation is misinformation's more malicious cousin, because someone, somewhere, knows it's false and is spreading it on purpose. For instance, during elections, false stories about candidates are sometimes deliberately circulated to create confusion or doubt. This is disinformation at play. Its creators know it's a lie, but they want it to take root and spread. Now that we've defined misinformation and disinformation, let's take a look at some real-world examples to see how these two concepts manifest in our everyday lives. We'll take the first example, COVID-19, the pandemic. Now, this falls under misinformation. During the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was an overwhelming flood of information about the virus. Much of it came from reliable sources like scientists and health professionals, but along with that came a tidal wave of misinformation. One widely spread example was the idea that drinking hot water or gargling salt water could kill the virus. People shared this with good intentions, believing they were helping others protect themselves. But the information was wrong. It wasn't based on science. In this case, the misinformation wasn't intended to harm. People thought they were offering a helpful remedy. But even without harmful intent, misinformation can still be dangerous because it leads to confusion and prevents people from following proper health advice. Here's another example of for you, and it falls in the disinformation category: political elections. So, on the other hand, we just gave you an example of misinformation, so here you go. On the other hand, during the 2016 US presidential election, we saw a surge in disinformation campaigns. A famous example is the Pizzagate conspiracy, which falsely claimed that high-profile politicians were involved in a child trafficking ring based out of a pizzeria. This was not just misinformation, it was disinformation, deliberately designed to influence public perception and fuel mistrust. The people who created and spread these stories knew they were false. Their goal wasn't just to confuse people, it was to stir up outrage, create division, and possibly affect the election's outcome. This is a classic example of disinformation, where the intent behind the falsehood is malicious and manipulative. Which moves me to our third part of this: the impact on society. Now that we have seen how misinformation and disinformation play out in the real world, let's talk about their impacts. Both can be harmful, but the nature of that harm can be quite different. Misinformation, when spread widely, can cause confusion and prevent people from accessing reliable information. Think about health misinformation. If someone believes a false cure is effective, they may avoid seeking real medical treatment. This can lead to worse health outcomes or even loss of life. Think Steve Jobs. In the age of social media, misinformation spreads like wildfire, and even well-meaning individuals can unknowingly contribute to the problem. Disinformation, however, has more intentional consequences because it's designed to deceive. It often has specific targets. Political disinformation, for instance, can undermine trust in a democratic process. If enough people believe that the elections are rigged or that their votes don't count, I've heard that many times, this weakens the entire system. The consequences of disinformation are often more severe, as they are meant to create long-term damage. But here's the tricky part. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between misinformation and disinformation, especially online. We often see false information passed along by our friends or family, and it's difficult to know whether they've been misled or are knowingly spreading lies. This blurred line makes it even more crucial for us to be vigilant. So, how to spot it, or how to spot and combat false information? Well, we're going to get into this right now. So, how do we protect ourselves from the spread of both misinformation and disinformation? Here are a few tips for spotting false information and stopping it in its tracks. Number one, check the source. Always look at where the information is coming from. Is it from a reliable, notice those keywords, people, reliable news, organization, or an official source? There are a couple of news agencies here in America that have been sued and found liable for spreading disinformation, and they've had to pay for it. You can easily Google who they are. So if that is who you rely on for your news, please, I urge you, no, I implore you, go find news somewhere else. Like, seriously. Okay, so be wary of sensational headlines from unknown or questionable outlets. Number two, verify the facts. Okay, cross-check information with trusted fact-checking websites like Snopes or factcheck.org. If a piece of news seems suspicious, chances are someone has already fact-checked it, right? Which moves me on to number three. Watch for emotional triggers. Disinformation often plays on strong emotions like fear, anger, or outrage. And if you're a nerd like me, you know what path that leads you to. So if you read something that makes you feel an intense emotion, pause, verify before sharing. Look for context. Sometimes information is misleading because it's presented without context. A statistic might be true, but manipulated to tell a partial story. Always consider the broader picture. And number five, be skeptical of breaking news. Oh boy, yes. In today's fast-paced media environment, breaking news can sometimes be incorrect or incomplete. Wait for more credible sources to confirm the story before jumping to conclusions, especially if you still use things like X or Twitter, or you go to social media. That would probably be the last place I would look if you notice a news headline, because everybody's trying to break it first. They're trying to be the first person because they want to be first. However, I would wait. So if you see something breaking across the, media, social media, news outlets, wait a little bit. Wait a little bit for the accurate reporting to come through. So, by being critical of what we read and share, we can help reduce the spread of both misinformation and disinformation. Remember, it's not just about avoiding false information, it's about making sure we don't unintentionally pass it along to others. Which leads me to the conclusion. And there you have it, a breakdown of the key differences between misinformation and disinformation, and why it's so important to recognize them. Both can cause harm, but disinformation is particularly dangerous because it's intentional and designed to deceive. So think, what does Russia try to do to us in America? Well, not even just America. Europe has seen its effects, and a little bit of Australia, New Zealand, but primarily Europe and America. What does Russia try to do? So much. They try to spread disinformation. And what does that do? Look at the past 10 years and what life was like beforehand. Try to remember. Dig deep. I'll give you a minute. But remember what life was like, I'd probably say around 2015, 2014, 2015. And now look at where it's at. And look at what we know. Look at what we've uncovered, discovered, and how life is now. Most of that is because of disinformation spread by Russia, some China. But yeah, you can look at that. You can follow the trends. It's historical data. It's there. But as I mentioned, it's important to recognize them. Both can cause harm, but disinformation is particularly dangerous because it's intentional and it's designed to deceive. So, by staying informed and being skeptical, we can all do our part in limiting the spread of false information. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Unraveling Truth. And if you found this discussion to be helpful, be sure to subscribe and share this with your friends. And remember, the next time you come across a news story or a viral post, pause, check the facts, and think before you share. Stay curious, stay informed, and together we can unravel the truth. Until next time, I'm your host, signing off.